My name is Justin Winters. I'm the co-founder and executive director of One Earth. It's a nonprofit that is dedicated to advancing science-backed, community-driven solutions to the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. This panel, just so that we can kind of set up the conversation, is called Going Globalocal, Bioregional Climate Action. It's about rethinking how and where we take action, aligning our climate strategies with the ecological systems that truly sustain us, our watersheds, our food sheds, our cultures, and doing so in ways that center justice, equity, and local leadership. Really thrilled to be here with this crew, and I'm just gonna kind of read some of their bios. I know that their bios are available on the website, but it's good to just ground us with a bit of background on their work as we move into the conversation. Colette is all the way at the end, if you don't know her, is a fierce advocate for climate justice rooted in her home of Bayou Liberty, Louisiana. A lawyer and community leader, Colette spent nearly 2 decades building the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy to serve communities of color in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. Today, she co-leads Taproot Earth, whose new initiative, Gulf South to Appalachia, is advancing the traditions of Southern freedom struggle by building a regional movement rooted in self-determination and collective power. Colette is also a 2019 Obama Foundation Fellow and the recipient of the 2023 Heinz Award for the Environment. Great to have you. Ariel, sitting right next to her. Many of you probably do know Ariel. maybe not. Ariel Deranger, a longtime friend and ally. I've known her for at least over a decade. We were trying to figure this out the other day. But she is a powerful voice for Indigenous rights and climate justice. She's a member of the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation. Ariel is the co-founder and executive director of Indigenous Climate Action and a representative of the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change. She also serves on the board here at Bioneers and was recently named a recipient of the 2024 Climate Breakthrough Award. Amazing. From organizing divestment campaigns to leading mass mobilizations against the fossil fuel industry, Ariel's activism spans grassroots to global arenas, so you're perfect for this conversation. And lastly, we have Thomas Lindsay. He is a pioneer in environmental law and a true visionary in the community rights movement. Thomas Lindsay is a senior legal counsel for the Center of Democratic and Environmental Rights and is widely recognized for drafting the world's first rights of nature law. He also consulted on Ecuador's groundbreaking constitutional provisions protecting the rights of nature. Thomas has authored several books, including We the People, Stories from Community Rights Movement in the United States. Welcome, Thomas. I really wanted to have each of the panelists share their experiences on the ground driving bioregional community-driven action, because they all have incredible stories. And much of their work is starting to grow much more global. But it all started with place-based, community-driven work that is really fascinating and empowering. So why don't I kick it over to you, Ariel? Share your story.
She's picking on me because we met in my community many, many years ago, over a decade ago. So again, my name is Ariel Tsaekwi Deranger, and I'm a member of the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation. And believe either 2013 or 2014, we can't decide which year. Justin joined a team of people, a delegation that was coming to my community to learn about what was happening. So I come from the Treaty 8 territories of northern Alberta, and my community is an Arctic Zone A community. So we live just where the permafrost begins. And our community is also downstream to one of the largest industrial projects on planet Earth, the Alberta tar sands. And so Justin came with a delegation of some pretty high-profile individuals, and oddly enough, the only person I still talk to is Justin. But it was a really great experience just being able to invite people into our community, because this is a part of how we take the local stories and bring them to a global stage. Our community is a First Nations community, signatories to Treaty 8, and within the Treaty 8 negotiations and the agreements, we were told that we would have a say over what happens in our lands and territories, and that we would share the land. However, that hasn't actually happened. We've seen and how Indigenous peoples are treated across the Americas, and particularly in North America. And those treaties have been breached over and over and over and over again. But most recently, in the late 1990s and into the early 2000s, we saw a rampant expansion of what is now known as the Alberta tar sands. These projects had some of the most irreversible and extreme impacts on the lands, on the waterways, on the economies, on the lives and health of communities downstream, and my community is one of those. And Justin and I were talking about how her experience coming to my community was so profound that it changed her. Because it doesn't matter how many images you see or videos you see of the Alberta tar sands, being there and experiencing it firsthand, and just the extent of how big it is you can't imagine it, you have to experience it. And for me, this is deeply, deeply personal. These are not just simply some ecosystem that I want to protect. These are the homelands of my people, the place that we existed in since time immemorial. Our traditional name is the Kaitale Dene Sotlene, which means the people of the land, the people of the willow. And the willow is a reference to the Athabasca Delta, which is one of the world's last remaining inland freshwater deltas. It is so revered for its biodiversity that it is also home to a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the Wood Buffalo National Park. Yet, the rights of my community continue to be violated through the expansion of this project. And between the years of 2007 and 2017, I had to think about that, I was the spokesperson for my community challenging the expansion of the Alberta tar sands. So I worked directly with the elders in my community, those that were dealing with cancers, autoimmune diseases, respiratory diseases, hunters, fishers, and trappers that were harvesting animals that were diseased, that were not able to feel secure in drinking water collected from the river systems anymore because it was so contaminated and people were developing rare forms of bile duct cancer. I was helping to amplify these things of my community, and through the whole time, I was also experiencing the deep grief and trauma that we all collectively felt. My uncle, the late Pat Deranger, said to me, "Your name, Ariel Tseekwi," which is a Dene name, which means Thunder Woman, is your responsibility. You are the thunder, the sound that is carried from the action of the lightning. And you must carry the actions of our people farther than people can see. It is your job to be the spokesperson for our community. That was a huge responsibility to put on me when I was in my 20s. I was just like, how? But, you know, I had a lot of really great experiences and I had a lot of really great life experiences that ended up taking me into the UN International Forums. I started attending the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, where I actually helped to create the UN Indigenous Caucus, so the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus in 2007 to 2008. We were formalized as a recognized caucus. And in those spaces, one of the things I realized is that the issues of my community, as bad as they were, as horrific as they were not unique. That the experiences of Indigenous people globally was the same over and over and over again. If it wasn't tar sands, it was gold mining. If it wasn't gold mining, it was deforestation. If it wasn't deforestation, it was mega hydro. If it wasn't mega hydro, it was palm oil plantations, and on and on and on we go. The story was that for many Indigenous peoples, climate change didn't start with the Industrial Revolution. It started with first contact. Colonialism was the main driver of climate change for our communities because the climate changed for us, the lands changed for us, the ways in which we were able to operate and be in relationships with our lands changed for us when colonizers came and said that our ways of being were heathenistic, demonic. They had no value in the society of progress and development. And I realized that my experiences in my home community and having the support of my community to challenge this could give strength to other peoples that didn't know what to do. So, where do I go now? After years of working with my community to challenge and bringing really incredible names and people into my community, where we were able to stop and circumvent projects that were of massive scales. I believe the Tech Resource Frontier Mine was Tech Frontier Mine, by the way, like really. That mine, I believe, was the size of like Edmonton, and I don't know what that means, a city of 1 million people. That project was stopped because our community kept intervening and intervening and intervening over and over again, and we cost the company $20 million over the course of like 2 years by interrupting their project. In the end, I believe they said that we cost them next to $10 billion over the course of 12 years of interventions. We were also able to stop the Shell Jack Pine Mine expansion project and the Pierre River Mine project. We were able to stop project after project, but at the end of the day, we needed to do more than stop individual projects. It was about changing the lived realities for our communities, and I realized that wasn't going to, I couldn't just do this for my own community. It needed to be something that involves systemic change. So then I realized I needed to start working with more communities, and I had more Indigenous communities from all across North America being like, how did you do this? How did you get your people to stop? Didn't they get enticed by all the jobs and all the fancy things that the oil and gas companies offered? And I said, yes, they did, but we stood our ground. How? How did you do it? And soon I was talking to people about trading strategies and how we could build collective movements, and I knew at that moment that I could no longer continue to work for my nation. And my chief said to me, you've outgrown this. Your job now is to take what you've learned and share it with the rest of our communities. And I took that experience to build what is now known as Indigenous Climate Action, which is Canada's only Indigenous-led climate justice organization, where we work to build tools and resources to empower Indigenous communities to take the lead in setting the stage and the foundations for what real climate solutions are. And one of the most incredible reports that we created that I think is so important in the context of discussing real solutions to the climate crisis is that Indigenous people say things like, we are nature defending itself. We are the front lines of the climate crisis. But people use that as this romanticized, tokenistic thing. But we authored a report with Oil Change International and Indigenous Environmental Network that was called Indigenous Resistance Against Carbon. And it took the highest profiled Indigenous land defense movements from Turtle Island over the course of 10 years, and it quantified what those projects mitigated from how much carbon was mitigated from Indigenous land defense. Some of those projects were still in the process of being fought, but if all those projects were stopped and circumvented and preventing from happening, it would create the equivalent mitigated emissions of 26% of the annual emissions of Canada and the United States combined. So when we criminalize land defenders, we are literally stopping the mitigation of actual emissions from being produced. This is real climate action. But that only can happen if we continue to respect and value and nurture Indigenous cultures and ways of being. That we remember what our connections are to the land, that we remember what it means to be dene sotlene, which is to flow from the land, to be from the land. That when we reduce the climate crisis to a mathematical equation to be solved by balancing the carbon in the atmosphere, we are actually missing a key purpose, because it'll be so easy to just move numbers here and there and not think about the social impacts. For us, we have to remember that colonization, capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, and extractivism are at the roots of this. And that we need to not just restore the balance of the parts per million in the atmosphere, but we need to restore the balance with ourselves, with each other, and with the planet. And the global indigenous movement is growing. But we cannot be reduced to some romanticized stewards of the land, as if we are some antiquated versions of who we are. We are modern people with modern solutions, and we are taking real action. And some of that is rooted in language preservation, food security and food sovereignty movements. It is revitalization of cultures and practices that connect us to the lands and who we are as Indigenous peoples. And we are seeing this prove time and time again that Indigenous land tenure, land back, is a key driver in mitigating carbon, but also protecting biodiversity and driving solutions that develop economic and social systems that are just and fair. So as I embark on climate breakthrough, I'm taking the lessons that I've learned from my community, from the work that I've done with Indigenous climate action, to replicate this at a global scale with global communities. I've just started, so don't ask me exactly what I'm going to do, but I'm really excited to be working with a global community to figure out how we can take these same resources, the same love, the same drive for our culture, and impact policy, just transition, loss and damages, all of the negotiated pieces within the international fora to drive real policy that is just and fair for Indigenous peoples, for the planet, and for all of our brothers and sisters that are suffering from the impacts of colonization, capitalism, and white supremacy. Thank you.
Thanks, Ariel.
Thanks, Justin.
And now, Thomas, you get to go after Ariel. And I think you're gonna, did you want to share first seated, or do you want to go straight up to the podium? And
just talk a little bit about where we are, and then I can do that later as well. So our current environmental activism in the United States sucks. And it sucks because we're so obedient to a system of law and government that's been delivered to us, and we're on the receiving end of it. So when we get a proposal for a frack well, or for a toxic waste incinerator, or for a 20,000 head hog factory farm, or something coming into our particular community, we're basically told there's nothing we can do except to appeal the permit that's been issued for that particular project. And so that has us scrambling to the state environmental agency, and we hire a lawyer, and then we do these permit comments, and we put the permit comments in. If we aren't listened to, then we bring a lawsuit, which is what I did for about 12 years, was bring lawsuits on behalf of community organizations who had been the good kids and filed the permit comments and done all that kind of stuff, and then we would go into court, and we would argue to the judge that the corporation that put the permit application in had forgotten something or missed something in their permit application. And because that's what environmental lawyers do in the United States today, is they look at these 1,000-page corporate permit applications, and then they argue to judges about why they shouldn't have been issued. We're all so goddamn obedient to this whole thing because, and it's obedience because the industry that is proposing the project coming into your community were the ones who wrote the regulations in the first place underneath which the project is coming in. And then when we come in as communities to try to stop it, we're actually arguing under the corporation's own regulations that were put in the first place. How dumb is that? Right? And how predictable it is that we are where we are now, which is we are losing. In fact, we have lost big chunks of almost everything at this point. And So this globalocal concept, to me, is about taking the activism that traditionally has been expended for no really good reason at the state level or the federal level or the international level. I watch with pain at the international climate negotiations that are taking place because they are zero, going on zero, going on zero. It's like, the fact is it's more just a negotiation about who's going to pay who for the damage, but nobody's really talking about stopping climate change at this point. It's all about mitigation, and we all lie to each other. Sometimes we get into groups and, we say, this is the beginning of something big. Well, we're kind of at the end of something big, which is we can't even imagine what 1.5 degrees Celsius change looks like. It's the planet becomes uninhabitable, yet we are doing almost nothing at this point to stop that from happening. So on climate specifically, the fact is that there's all kinds of things that we could do if we were less obedient to the system. So in 2016, a little case called Juliana versus the United States. It was a climate change case brought by youth, recently got thrown out by the US Supreme Court, in fact last week or the week before. But in the course of this litigation, which took 12 or 13 years, because that's how long shit takes to go through the courts, that a judge in Oregon, a district court judge, actually put out an opinion. It's been lost to the weeds at this point pretty much, but she said that we all have a civil right to a sustainable, livable climate, a constitutional right to a livable climate. So we said to ourselves, well, why isn't that being written down anywhere? Like in your community, like if you wanted to pass a law, a local law that said everybody in the community has a constitutional right to a sustainable climate, and pass that law. Like in New Hampshire, you need 10 signatures on a petition to put something in front of a town meeting to make a binding law in the community. What would that look like? What if we put 350 ppm into law? What if we made it a legal standard and then we're able to sue companies and sue others, utilities, who are automatically violating that threshold? And you might say to me, well, Thomas, that's nuts, because that's not where climate change stuff, activism gets done. That's at a higher level. What good is it that we do it at a local level? And I would say to you, it's not being done anywhere at all right now. So that's like a +1 if it's done locally. So that work on climate stuff, which needs to be done, a small community in Colorado, Lafayette, Colorado, actually did that. The community put a local law together that was passed municipally that recognizes a constitutional right to a sustainable, livable climate within the city of Lafayette. And then they used it to chase a fracking company out of town, saying that if you frack here, you're violating our right to a sustainable climate. It's about putting in the standard and then actually using the standard to leverage these lawsuits. And I know all this is probably above most of us. When we talk about lawsuits or lawyers, our eyes roll back and we think, well, we're not the people to do that. I'm here to say you are. We have lost all agency. And I'm talking mostly municipal communities here, because indigenous communities I found have plenty of agency. But municipal communities, white, progressive communities in the United States, people feel they have no agency. Who am I to do something like that? I can't do something like that. I'll go to conferences and I'll applaud at other people that are doing stuff, but I can't do it here, right? I can't do it here. Well, you can. In fact, in many ways, part of our history is about people seeing themselves as lawmakers, law drafters, law adopters. And it's scary. But I've seen 500 communities in the United States actually make that transformation. When I gave up litigating in courts against stupid-ass permit appeal provisions and going in front of judges and losing to Monsanto and Waste Management Company and having their lawyers thank me after the hearings, after I had found something wrong with the permit application that they had submitted, because it allowed their law firm to bill more hours to the company to actually fill in the gaps, omissions, and deficiencies that we had identified within those permit appeals. That we basically quit doing environmental law and we began working with communities to draft their own laws. and then enforce those laws in those communities. So what does that look like? Well, communities began passing laws recognizing their right to clean air and clean water. Believe it or not, we have no guarantee in the United States of clean air or clean water. People think, well, the Clean Water Act does that or the Clean Air Act does that. Nope, doesn't. Sets standards, parts per million and other things, but it doesn't say you have a right to clean air or clean water. We live in a myth. This country is a myth. The concept, the argument that we have a democracy is a myth. It's a myth because when we try to use it, we're told that we can't. We live in a country in which corporate rights outweigh the rights of our communities. And until we pick that fight in a meaningful way, in something that strikes across the country as a counterweight to what's happening right now with the federal government being dismantled, state governments not doing shit, because basically they don't. It's decentralizing that power structure that has to happen in the US today. And that means us seeing ourselves as law drafters, lawmakers, law adopters, even though it seems like it's beyond us. I've seen it happen. As part of that, as I shut up, the work that we've done is not only about the community rights piece, about what if a community has a right to clean air or clean water, or a right to a sustainable energy future, or a right to a renewable energy future, that people started saying to us, well, what about nature? What about rights for nature? And the first community in 2006 we worked with in Pennsylvania to pass the first rights of nature law. But it didn't grow out of a kind of abstract concept of nature is wonderful. It came out of a toxic dumping project that was coming into the community. And the community said, what are the tools that we can create to actually stop this dumping from happening? And part of those tools, one of those tools was rights of nature, recognizing that the rivers and streams within the community actually had legally enforceable rights. And that gave them the rights basis, both human rights as well as the rights of nature, to actually push these projects off. Until we begin to envision that type of opposition, which is not from the defensive looking from the outside in, but is actually beginning to deconstruct the actual law and legal system itself to actually claim that local lawmaking for the values that we treasure, then we're cooked. That's it. There's nothing else. Because our activism, which is basically about talking to each other about stuff, needs to actually engage the system that the corporations use every day to actually destroy us. So until we do that, we're kind of up the creek.
I love that I'm not the radical one on the panel, is all I'm saying.
I thought he set you up really well.
Oh my gosh, I have so much joy in my heart from those two presentations right now. Yeah, peace everyone. Bringing peace and greetings from the traditional lands of the Choctaw Nation in Southeast Louisiana. And just really, wow. I feel like I could just go, really. I can just go home. We're done. Dropping mics around here, dropping mics. Well, let me bring in, I think, maybe one more aspect that really is the same thing that we've heard, which is thinking about climate and climate change in places and communities that don't really talk about it like that. Words like climate change work in some places, but really don't work everywhere. And I come from the post-Katrina Gulf South, and the work that I began to do there was not because I was a climate activist or an environmentalist. I remember being offended when I got called an environmentalist. I was like, what are you talking about? We don't like them. No self-respecting Southerner likes an environmentalist. Hello. I'm not an environmentalist. I'm just from the bayou of South Louisiana, which turns out to be an environmentalist. Anyway, but what happened in that space, the work that I'm doing now is not because I thought of myself as an environmentalist or an ecologist, and not because I studied biology or any of these things. It's because you grow up in the bayou and you learn that you are part of a system, and your life depends on that system. And somehow the work got called regional because I live right on the Louisiana line to Mississippi. And so to some, it looks like I crossed the state border. To others, it looks like I just went down the street like 5 miles. And all of a sudden, the work was regional. We didn't call it regional, we just called it checking on your neighbor, but that's okay. They called it regional. And so this localized work became regional because there was a state line that was crossed that no person would really know you were crossing, which just should make you wonder who drew the lines in the first place. That's right. Let's go there, because the lines that exist in our country and around the world have been created, sometimes on the back of a napkin, sometimes just on a whim. And they are creating a lot of the problems that we're dealing with right now, including legal jurisdictions, and where people can move and choose to move particular projects. But let me just go back to post-Katrina Gulf Coast, which, by the way, it'll be 20 years this year in August. And we'll be asking all of you and the Bioneers family to stand with the Gulf South in August. You'll get a notice, and all we're gonna do is ask you to just say you remember. You remember what Katrina was, and you remember what it was to this nation, to the communities, and to the world. And for many of us, it was a wake-up call in the climate crisis. And so there's this storm, and it was terrible. But what most people heard about was what happened in New Orleans, right? The levees, the storm came, the levees breached, the city filled up, and it was terrible. And that's all true. But what you didn't hear about a lot was that the storm turned to the east, hit the Louisiana-Mississippi line, and it took out Mississippi and Alabama before the levees breached from the water driving back into the lake and into the city. And so I say that to say that the storm itself did not recognize those lines. You know, homegirl just did what she had to do, right? It was 3 states all along the coast. So when you're doing recovery across 3 states on a coast with invisible lines that some white guys drew a long time ago, with black communities and indigenous communities who just check on each other because we're just neighbors, the lines don't mean much to us, not really. You start to realize that the local work that you're doing is regional to some folks who write papers. And I was very interested in the bioregions map and what you said y'all are going to include, because culturally, the coast is the same. We do things the same way. Our gumbo is, in fact, better than Mississippi's gumbo, but we can talk about that later. Now, we don't have to figure that out right now. But pretty much everything else is the same, you know what I mean? We do things the same way, we talk the same way, we check on each other the same way, we have this very similar knowledge, and so there is a familiarity despite being in different states. The other familiarity across the Gulf South was, well, before we called it the Gulf South, people were calling it the Gulf Coast, and the coast left out the rest of the state. So we literally shifted the name in right around 2010 to start referring to the region as the Gulf South, because they were using the coastal biosphere to separate from the delta, from the top. So we had to figure out, how do we build movement? And the first thing that we learned was we build movement through a shared identity. And the shared identity required us to broaden the regional explanation. And so the term Gulf South was not just created, but used by the community, and now people use it all the time. That was the community said to call it like that. And if you're gonna organize in the Gulf South, you're organizing against 2 big things. You're organizing against big oil, and you're organizing against lots of ports, big shipping, big port shipping. I gotta come up with a better way to say that. Big oil sounds easy, but big shipping, you know, big ships, big ports. So 5 years after Katrina, BP oil drilling disaster happens. And now what we have is not only an ecological disaster that has connected us and our cultural bioregion, but we have a reality of the industry that has pretty much put us in the position in the first place. The storm that came to hit us is accelerated and fueled by the jobs and the industry that we give all of our time and attention to. So hearing, did they get enticed by the jobs? Yeah, we get enticed by the jobs. Everybody in South Louisiana works in oil and gas. And if not, they work in tourism, which, as it turns out, the tourism goes down when there's oil all in the water and you can't eat the shrimp and the gumbo's not good anymore. So we started organizing in the region, the Gulf South region, dealing with big oil. We've got similar traditions, we've got similar ways of doing things, and we've got the same industries over and over again. And we realized that we could make a change in the United States if we went after the energy industry. That's not easy. The oil and gas industry in the world is the most powerful, makes the most money, and go big or go home, right? Might as well go after big oil. No, let's go even bigger than that. Let's connect two regions. The two regions that control the energy of the United States. The Gulf South, and anybody want to guess the next one? Texas, we include Texas as part of the Gulf South. Those all 5 states and Puerto Rico is what we call the Gulf South. Because of the bioregion, because of the shared culture, which if you've not been to New Orleans, you would recognize, most Caribbeans recognize the Caribbeanness of South Louisiana. So another conversation for another time. The other region we brought in was Appalachia. So if the Gulf South has got oil and gas, Appalachia has got coal and gas. Now what happens when you bring movement together from the two regions of this country that control the energy of this country? Well, you make change. You save the planet, really. There's only one problem. Maybe a few more than one, but there's one big problem. We have never dealt with the history of this country. We have never dealt with those things that will divide us. And even when our lives are on the line, sometimes, we're so caught up in these things that they're literally made up, like borderlines and race. They snag us, they stop us, and we don't get anywhere. We could save the entire planet with the Gulf South and Appalachia coming together, but we got to deal with race, and we have to deal with colonization. We were, my partner Anthony G. and Caterino's back there, and we co-run Taproot Earth together, and one of the things that we said that was crazy, just crazy, is that we do not get to climate justice without Black liberation. Now, the entire climate movement did not know what we were talking about. They wanted to know where was the greenhouse gas analysis. And I tell you, the greenhouse gas analysis, as Ariel mentioned, is for us an analysis of where was the root cause of this? Where did this start from? So Black liberation as part of climate justice is a necessary part of an analysis. And if you don't have that analysis, meet me, let's have a drink. I'll convince you. It'll take 10 minutes. And then we'll move on from that. Because if we sit here and root everything into a reduction of greenhouse gases, we will end up back where we have been, which is systems-based in extraction, systems-based in dividing us, and then we will begin to look at each other with these fake things that have been drawn. The lines, the race categories, all of these things have been made up, and we believe it. I like what the brother said, we a little cray-cray. We're not all the way there. We're fighting the wrong things. We're fighting ghosts and invisible lines and things that aren't real. And so the work has really been not to reduce, yes, to reduce greenhouse gases, but the bigger work is to actually cultivate and practice democracy. How do we manage our own resources? How do we make municipal laws that just say you can't pollute the river? I often am frustrated with philanthropy because, they want the project and the statistics of how many units you built or whatever it is. But what we really need, especially in this moment, is a society of people who know how to make decisions collectively and know how to manage their natural resources. Because the other thing that's not real is money. I know we don't want to talk about that. They made that shit up too. I'm just saying, they made lines, they made race, they made money. That's not really real. Food is real, water is real, but none of this, and look what we're fighting over. Look what we fight over. It's invisible. It's invisible and it's ghost and it's not real and they made it up, and there's a new moment afoot right now, which is we can flip the switch if we want to. I mean, if we had enough courage, and I know I'm going to shock and scare many of you who have money in your bank account, but let me tell you, during Katrina, the banks went down. During Katrina, the grocery stores went down. During Katrina, the ATMs, the gas stations went down. You want to know who fed the people? The bayou dudes who knew how to fish. The old people who knew where the wells were. We have aquifers that we could tap. That's the knowledge. That is the wealth of the knowledge that we have to collectivize. That is the democracy that we have to practice. It's not just about how we redistribute dollars, and we should redistribute dollars, and dollars matter, but that's not the system that we need to uphold. We need to have the courage to do something different. What we are advancing at Taproot Earth is self-determination and self-governance. And at this point, I can't tell folks what they need in Canada, and they might not know what's needed in South Louisiana, but we should have a practice at our community level to make the decisions for ourselves, and that's power. And what we're up against right now are people steadily extracting the power of our history, of our communities, and of who we are. The biggest shift that we make from little Louisiana across the Mississippi line, pulling in the Gulf South, connecting to Appalachia, the largest jump we make is to the Black diaspora. Taproot Earth also roots itself in the Black diaspora. That's anywhere the transatlantic slave trade went. So that's the continent of Africa, the Caribbean, South America, North America, Western Europe. Because we believe that the solutions are not only in the front lines of the climate crisis, but they're in the frontline peoples who began to have a new life and a new way of doing things at the root cause of the climate crisis. So yes, we say black people, we don't apologize for it. Pretty much what we're looking for are white friends who really don't get nervous about that. At some point, all of you are just gonna have to practice saying the word. It's okay, nobody's gonna get offended. If you say, well, don't say you have one black friend, but do say you believe in Black and Indigenous leadership. Because what's got to begin to happen now is a real ability to tell the truth and to have the courage to shift the system. And the system, unfortunately, is targeting Indigenous folks and Black folks everywhere. Because the electric cars, the cell phones, the solar panels, and all of those things that we feel really great about investing in really just continues our consumption and extraction from the same people that we're saying we're down with, but we're not really down with. There's a shift that has to happen, and it is about managing our own resources. This is about democracy and practicing that, and nothing more, but that's pretty big. And I think if we can get through the invisible things, the lines, the borders, they're not real. The race categories, they're not real either. The money and the crypto, whatever, that is not real. They just make it up. If we can get past that, what we could do is build power. And if we can build power, we can survive. And that's where we are right now, I'm sad to say. I thought we could be at a thriving place, but right now we're just at survive. And I think it's the movements, the local movements that go regional to global, that's what's gonna help us survive. Ashe.
So I knew this would happen. I have about 20 questions here, and we have exactly 20 minutes left in this panel. And we also want to do a Q&A with you all. So maybe we can do I'll throw one question out there for you all to dig into, and then we can pivot to Q&A questions. And hopefully, Thomas, you'll have a chance to kind of show us what you have teed up. I don't think so. Well, see my question. Maybe it'll be a good way to kind of answer that. But given the moment that we're in, and you've touched on this, but given the moment that we're in that feels so scary, so overwhelming, people's lives are being threatened, resources are being pulled, services are going under, and meanwhile, climate disasters are happening. It happened in LA, where I live, in January. What climate strategies, what community strategies, what levers of change, what are the strategies that you're most excited about? Do you feel the pull to lean into because you think that they have a shot for really driving change right now? Whoever wants to.
They didn't jump, so I'm jumping. Well, I'll be brief and offer some space, but Taproot really believes that the first thing we need to do is acknowledge and repair the harms of extractive economies and racialized capitalism as a main part of our strategy. And what we've decided to do as an organization is to go after the church, the crown, and the corporations. That's right. I want to blame my partner Anthony on the church. And I was like, hey Anthony, what do you want to do? He's like, let's take on the Catholic Church. And I was like, word. Let's do that. He's a small thinker, that Anthony. Anyway, the opportunity in 2025 was to take the Catholic Church at its word to celebrate a year of Jubilee, as is determined by its own internal doctrine, that says we should, let go of debt and cancel debt. And we said, we agree. Mr. Your Highness, Pope Man, we agree. And we would like to help support that, or take on the church and say, you should do what you say you're going to do. You should forgive and cancel the debt where possible. In addition, there is repair that must be done. There needs to be the establishment of a global fund that you give 10% of the Catholic Church's wealth. That's right, the church can tithe to the community. Hallelujah. Amen. Jesus is real. I'm just trying to tell y'all better. I know the liberals like to let the church go. Don't let it go. Jesus is a powerful ally in the climate movement. Powerful. Church, you can tithe 10%, not all of your money, just 10%. You can put 10% back in the bucket and let the community decide what they're going to do with the money. Sounds fair. By the way, give them their land back. Yeah, because the church is one of the largest landholders on the planet. Give them their land back. Why are you all over Uganda and such? Give them their land back. You could be in Italy, that's fine. Have the little Vatican area. Have that area, that's your general area. All the rest of the areas, give that back. You don't need that. That's taking a nod from the indigenous movement on the land back. So put a little money in the pot, give the land back, and just say you're sorry. And I'm just saying. That's step number one. Let's do that. 2025, Jubilee. The strategy is to first go after the church, not because the Catholic Church is the only culprit, but because if it can happen at the Catholic Church, it can happen with all of the churches. The next step is to go after the crown, and I do mean the British crown. And it's not just because they're the only culprit, it's because if they can do it, the other crowns can too. The strategy should look very similar. And the third group we're going after are the corporations, specifically fossil fuel corporations, who in South Louisiana are responsible for how far that storm came in, and how far the storms are coming in now, and how the storms are actually forming in the Gulf now. Those are accelerated by an industry that is being fueled to cause imbalance across the planet. All we're asking for as a strategy is repair. And repair to the very people who are of that place. You put the indigenous folks and the black folks first. You put black liberation as part of where we're all headed. And you put repair as a main strategy, and we can actually get ourselves out of a bad situation. Yeah.
We can all just go now. I think we got the strategies right here. I mean, I think that all of that, honestly, all of that is absolutely fundamental. That church strategy, dang. Why didn't I think of that? When we talk about what strategies, what community strategies and levers of change are you most excited about for driving real change? As an Indigenous sovereigntist, I think that sovereignty and self-determination really is a part of talking about bioregional action. And you can't uncouple the two. I think that one of the big things is particularly as we're seeing the rise of fascism and the rise of the climate disaster escalating every single day, not just here in North America, but globally, fascism and the climate disaster are on the rise globally. We are also seeing that there's this cognitive dissonance that is driving that. And that cognitive dissonance of our connections to the natural world is really there. For Indigenous peoples, we recognize that our lands and our homes that we have stewarded for millennia, they're not just lands. They're not just things to be owned and to be dominated and to provide us with resources to drive our economies and our everyday lives, but they are our relatives. And when we talk about the rights of nature as an extension of human rights, we also have to talk about how the collective rights of peoples also exist. We talk about democracy being the foundations of driving collective decision-making processes, but when we talk about human rights and the way that our society is driven, it is predicated on systems of hyper-individuality. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights talks about our individual rights, and we need them. We need all those individual rights and protections. But one of the most critical foundational pieces of global conventions is the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And some people say, well, why do you need specific, different rights? How are Indigenous rights different than human rights? It is predicated on structures of collective rights. And not just collective human rights, as human people, but the collective rights that we have as human and our relatives of the lands, of all of the flora and fauna. Our cultures, our languages, our practices, and our protocols are driven by a type of democracy that we call natural law. And so when we talk about driving forward real systemic levers for change, it is about how we can root ourselves in true decision-making that is being driven and led by Indigenous peoples, reminding us that we have relatives beyond humanity and that we have to be driven by the laws of nature, not by these fictional systems of money and cryptocurrencies and the myth of the type of democracies that are driven by people in positions of power that come from systems that are driven from the church and Catholicism that say man's dominion over the land. Terra nullius, doctrine of discovery, those are all made up. What's not made up is when Katrina can take out those borders and those communities. That is natural law. And Indigenous communities know that implicitly. So for me, I see a major driver for change is how we can drive and implement things like the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples at the foundations of legislation to change the ways in which we envision democracy, to lay foundations of laws to protect people, to protect the lands, and to protect nature for future generations. Indigenous peoples, and one of my elders, Casey Camp, says, we are nature protecting itself. We can all be nature protecting itself, but we have to remember that we don't just have individual rights and freedoms, we also have collective rights. And those rights are also responsibilities. The lands are not just simply things to be taken advantage of to drive political and economic gain. For our communities, they are our medicine chests, they are our teachers, our pantry and grocery stores. They are our lifelines. And yet we treat them like fodder for our greed to drive capitalism and colonialism. We need to absolutely be talking about also understanding our collective struggles for liberation are also tied. Black liberation, 100%. We cannot miss that. Indigenous liberation, we cannot miss that. We cannot forget about our disabled and our elderly. We cannot forget about our gender diverse people that are being marginalized and criminalized in this country right now. Intersectionality is about that interconnected collective being. And it's Indigenous peoples that are continuing to drive this narrative as we drive for collective solutions to the climate crisis that are not just about reducing the emissions in the atmosphere, but about systems change and reform. How do we move from individual to collective, understanding our relationships with nature? When we can start to dismantle and decolonize, and I really want to drive this last point forward. A lot of time people confuse decolonization they confuse indigenization with decolonization. We think, if we just we bring enough chairs around the table for the Black sisters, for the Indigenous sisters, for all of the people of the global majority, that we are now decolonizing. Look at us, we got all the people here at the table and we're all making decisions, but that table wasn't built by us. Decolonization means we need to deconstruct these systems and structures that were never built for us to succeed, and we need to create systems where we're building these systems together. decolonize, and build new structures that are built on the foundations of collective frameworks that are being driven by Indigenous peoples and those that have been most marginalized. That's what I'm most excited for. And it can actually be quantified. Emissions reductions. We are seeing it over and over again. If that's what you really want, we can give you the math and the numbers if that's what you really want. But we need to reframe the way in which we think. That's what's exciting. And also, let's take the money from the church and, let's do all of the other things that you did, because I think that is so clever. I want to do that now. Thank you.
Top two things quickly that excite me right now. The first is that tribes in the US are beginning to pass rights of nature laws that protect ecosystems on reservation land, and then enforcing them outside of reservation land against projects like pipelines. So the White Earth Band of Ojibwe in Minnesota, with our help, wrote a rights of wild rice law to protect wild rice or monomen on the reservation. Enbridge's Line 3 pipeline, which is now pumping oil, unfortunately, outside the reservation, the tribe chose to collaterally attack it with a rights of nature law, saying that the 8 billion gallon water withdrawal permit issued by the state of Minnesota for the pipeline was actually dewatering wild rice habitat protected by rights of nature laws on the reservation. So I think that led immediately to the Sauk-Suiattle lawsuit that was brought in the name of salmon against the city of Seattle for the lack of fish passage around the Skagit River dams in Washington state. City of Seattle was forced to settle with the Sauk-Suiattle tribe and agreed to render fish passage around the hydroelectric dams on the river. So I think that in itself is very exciting. The second thing that's exciting is that there's a project now known as Land That Owns Itself, in which we found a way for ecosystems to actually hold title to land. So in the project that we're working on in Colorado, a foundation has given us a mountain, and the mountain by June will own itself. The ecosystems on the mountain, including the soil ecosystem, the water ecosystem, the climate ecosystem, joining together in a legal entity that can legally hold title to the land, overseen by an indigenous guardianship council. So I think it's a way of putting one foot in Western law for it to be somewhat defensible, and another foot in this new paradigm of what we hope to see over the next couple decades.
I wish we could go for another hour, because I know there's so many more rich ideas and brilliant ideas, like taking down the Catholic Church and making them pay up. And then, but I do think I think we've got about 10 or 15 minutes, so maybe we can do a couple of questions.
Hi, Baratunde Thurston, trying to speak fast. Love everyone up here. Thank you so much. Colette, hi. Big oil. And work with me, big boats. Okay. There you go. All right. I wanted to point your attention. There's a great group. You caught it. I like big boats. I cannot lie. Okay. But they're a problem for the birds in the sky. Black Liberation, Indigenous Sovereignty, Bliss Collective, just a great organization I think all y'all would love and would love to know about. I am curious about an honest and grounded perspective on the best case scenario you see for our future. Thank you. We don't have time to do other things.
Sure. The token white guy, here you go. you solve it. So I think I'm going to get to the answer. The first step is understanding the situation that we're in, which is that what we're facing right now was embedded a long time ago, longer ago than the U.S. has been around. But the U.S. Constitution actually is a problem. It's a problem because it's a 1780s version of governance, At the time, it only protected 4% of the people that were living in the United States who walking on two legs. Nobody even knew it was happening. You had a small group of people write this thing. It puts property above everything else. You can thumb through the Constitution, you won't see the word environment, you won't see the word labor, it doesn't exist. It elevates certain rights. It's our source code. The Constitution is the source code, basically, for how this country runs. So even though today, with Trump and all this other shit happening, things are bad, and they are bad, but they're just kind of more obvious. This place was drifting in that direction anyway. This is all kind of like rough edge kind of stuff. I mean, what we're talking about is the basic stuff underneath, the property, how property relates to everything else, and how it controls the courts and everything else. So you asked a question about what's the best future that we can envision. A movement that grows from these individual site fights into a constitutional rewrite that changes the source code. And so that's my best scenario that actually gets it off our back, because it's on our back. It's why we're always on the defensive, because we're always fighting property in the form of capital that comes after us, and we're coming at it from a different angle. The problem is, I've been saying this for 20 years, there's not one that's grown. We go to conferences, you have water activists in one room, you have timber activists in another room. We censor ourselves to say it's all a different problem, and we get into our little groups and circles. It's all the same thing, which is that we don't have the legal authority to do shit, and yet we pretend we do. And so until we grab that piece, which is embedded that deeply in the constitutional construct, and actually rewrite the damn thing, and other places have. Ecuador has rights of nature in their national constitution now. It's not as crazy as it sounds. But that becomes a life document, not a property and capital document. It's basically a charter of capitalism at this point. That's what the constitutional structure is, leaving out the Bill of Rights, the good stuff that came in through a separate revolution. But the Constitution itself, that source code, it's a charter of capitalism. That's what it is. And it haunts us. Every time a community tries to stop a frack well and gets sued by a corporation for taking its property, every time we try to stop anything at the community level, the Constitution is used as a weapon. And so the question is, how do we build this in a way that unites all of these, right now disjointed factions working on individual pieces in individual places into a constitutional rewrite movement? That's kind of the dream. Yeah.
I feel like that's decolonization. That's kind of the strategy that I'm going for too, is that we need to connect all of these communities that are fighting these fights with seemingly individual struggles. For me, when I was fighting individual projects, yes, we can applaud all of these individual fights, but when we're only tackling them from an individual perspective, it's like forever. It's like cutting off the head of Hydra. It just grows another head somewhere else. And so it does come from fundamentally deconstructing the systems and rebuilding them collectively together. And unfortunately, when you talk about best case scenarios, I don't think that we're going to be able to do that in any quick turnaround time. That it's going to happen when we become desperate because the climate crisis is so untenable, and it's going to probably involve a lot of losses. At this point, they're only calculating how much they can mitigate of those losses at this point, as opposed to actually trying to stop the crisis from escalating. They're just trying to figure out how many lives they need to lose in order to maintain systems of economic power as they exist now. That is the reality that we live in. And it's a depressing reality. But at the end of the day, one thing, again, Casey Camp, is Mother Nature is boss. They don't give a shit what our political economic structures are. They don't care what iteration of capitalism and political powers we're currently existing in. They don't care about the borders. We have seen time and time again the forest fires, the tornadoes, the typhoons, the hurricanes that do not care about the borders, and we will continue to see those rise into those systems of political and economic powers don't matter anymore, and we have to come together and act in a collective framework. And then we will be forced to decolonize and dismantle these systems and rebuild them together to build systems that actually serve people and the planet as a collective. That's what I see. I don't know what will happen in between then and now, but that's what I champion for. I'm not asking for reform of these systems. I want to dismantle these systems so that we can build something that actually serves justice for people and the planet.
Colette, do you want to wrap us up? I've been told that we've got a time check, so, yeah.
Wrapping
Okay.
it up. Yeah, I'm in like a really angry place. So I get the question and I appreciate it. And also like, what Katrina taught me was, there's a moment in these spaces, there's a moment where we could choose to do the right thing. We're capable of it. We even know what the right thing is. And I've seen over the last 20 years, again and again, race and gender and position push us into choosing the wrong things, even to our own detriment, even to our own survival. I've seen so much potential just lost. So many opportunities just squandered. And I think that the best case scenario for me, because some of us know how real this moment is, and some of us are just waking up to the reality of this moment. But there are many of us who've been living in this for a very long time. And we know the gravity of this moment. My hope of the best case scenario is that we grow some courage. We grow the type of courage that you saw in South Africa to take down apartheid. And we grow the type of courage that you watch folks like literally go take their stuff back. I think about the civil rights movement and what, guns in your face and you stand anyway. I'm not sure that our society has groomed or cultivated the type of population who can hold steady. And my best case scenario is that we do, that my blackness doesn't deter you from doing what's right, that my southernness doesn't allow you to sacrifice the South again, that we choose something bigger than ourselves, bigger than our individual need to be right or loved or hugged, but like that collective that Ariel was speaking of. I don't know that I'm hopeful, but I am prayerful about it. I've seen us fall down a few times on this one. I'm hoping this is serious enough for us to not fall again, but I don't know. I'm prayerful that we will just see each other's humanity. I'm prayerful that we'll understand that our humanity can't exist without our ecology and our broader systems. And I'm prayerful that when the time comes, which is now, by the way, everyone, some people are waiting for the bell. Ding, ding. That was the bell. That's how it sounds. It's here. I'm prayerful that we can merge into an organism that can protect itself. And I'm prayerful of that. I know we have the potential. I think that might be a best case scenario. And I've seen the best of people too. I've seen it. I've seen the reddest redneck help the poorest, blackest person in the middle of a hurricane. I've seen it. It can happen. There's a point where we forget these things that we've been taught and that we've taken on. And it requires us to just be more in touch with our own humanity and let go of some of this other stuff that people have taught us. It's not real. So I'm hopeful that we will lean into the humanity a little bit and become a single organism that can protect itself and then thrive and grow. Yeah, Ashe.
I literally can't imagine a more beautiful vision to hold on to. So thank you for sharing that. It's really been an honor to be in conversation with you all. Thank you for sharing those stories. And maybe as you all are leaving tonight and walking out the doors and maybe coming back here for Appalachia Rising, maybe just connect with somebody that you haven't met yet. Because I think if anything is clear about Bioneers, but also about this moment and also about the vision that you're speaking to, it's about community and connection and having conversations and broadening and deepening the movement, making it diverse, strong, resilient. So anyway, we're all here now, and this is a great place to start. And if you have a chance, scan the QR code up there and give us feedback on this session and what you liked about it, how you might want to do it differently next year. And thank you so much for being here.